I want to move to New York, really badly. Ever since I first visited as a kid, I've been in love with the city. I watched every Casey Neistat video as a kid, wondering what it would be like to live my life there. But every time I look at listings, I get this overwhelming feeling of dread. Apartments are so expensive. The cost of living seems insurmountable. The logistics of moving across the country feel paralyzing. And so here I am, still in my parents' house, making videos, talking about how I want to move to New York. But apparently I'm not alone. For the first time in American history, fewer than 10% of Americans moved last year. It's the lowest rate since the census started tracking mobility in the 1940s. We are collectively stuck. But this wasn't always the case. America was literally built on mobility. Our entire national identity was founded on the idea that you could pick up and go wherever there was opportunity. No society has ever been as mobile as the United States once was. No one's even come close. Get this, in the 19th century, roughly a third of all Americans changed their address annually. Europeans were stunned by this. The French writer Michel Cavalier observed in 1835 that the American is, quote, devoured with a passion for locomotion and cannot stay in one place. So what happened? How do we go from a nation that prided itself on mobility to one where people increasingly stay where they are, even when they desperately want to leave? I want to explore what changed, why moving feels so daunting now, and what we can do about it. And hopefully somewhere along the way, I'll figure out a way to move to New York. Did you know there used to be an actual holiday called Moving Day? It was an American holiday celebrated throughout the 19th century around the 1st of May. According to a Chicago newspaper in 1882, it was, quote, as recognized a day as Christmas or the 4th of July. On Moving Day, thousands of people would simultaneously pick up and swap homes. Imagine entire cities with piles of furniture on street corners, wagons careening through narrow roads, and I assume millions of crying moms. Moving wasn't just common, it was expected. A Wilmington, Delaware newspaper, also in 1882, was quoted saying, many private families make it a point to move every year. I know I keep throwing quotes at you, but the next one's a banger. Moving Day was nothing short of a religious experience. The individual who does not move on the 1st of May is looked upon as a heretic and a dangerous man. But it wasn't just about Americans being restless. Mobility was an economic engine. For 200 years, poor Americans moved to rich cities and got richer. The poorest and richest places in America were converging because people could pick up and follow opportunity. Okay, let me give you a concrete example. If a lawyer moved from the Deep South to New York City in 1960, he would see his net income go up about 39% after adjusting for housing costs. But if a janitor made the same move, he'd do even better, gaining 70% more income. Moving from low-income places to high-income places was... Whoa. Moving from low-income places to high-income places was a path to a better life, especially for working-class Americans. The continuous movement of people powered economic growth and incomes. It wasn't just about money, it reshaped American culture and politics. As people moved around, they had to learn to get along with newcomers. It created a culture more accepting of change. So what happened? When did Americans stop moving, and why? There wasn't a single moment when everything changed, but rather a series of shifts that gradually made moving more difficult. First, there were demographic changes. The median American age increased from 16 in 1800 to 28 in 1970 to nearly 39 today, which is super old. We also saw the rise of dual-income households, which makes coordinated moves much more challenging. When both parents work, relocating means finding 2 new jobs, not 1, which is much more difficult. But perhaps the most critical factor driving housing scarcity, as highlighted by people like Ezra Klein, emerged in policy shifts, starting in 1970. This era saw the rise of what could be termed a vetocracy in local development. This is where communities exponentially increase their power to block new projects through restrictive zoning, detailed land use rules, and procedural hurdles like environmental reviews. Land use regulations tightened dramatically, climbing from roughly a quarter of their current restrictiveness in 1970 to about 3/4 by 1990. While framed as promoting local control or environmental protection, the practical effect was the creation of severe supply-side bottlenecks. This wasn't just regulation, it was a fundamental change in America's capacity and willingness to build, transforming communities from growth-oriented to growth-resistant, and directly contributing to the lack of housing abundance we see today. There is a political dimension to this change. When the share of liberal votes in a city increased by 10 points, the housing permits it issued declined by 30%. There's an irony that the people who claim to be a champion of inclusion and diversity ended up creating systems that made it harder for newcomers to join their communities. This crisis isn't just about abstract policy, it's about real barriers that make moving seem impossible. First, there's the housing cost imbalance. Increases in housing prices have doubled relative to the increase in income since 1960. This means moving to a high-income area costs more than ever, wiping out any wage gains. Remember our janitor from the 1960s who could move to New York and increase his income by 70%? Well, if you run the numbers in 2017, the same move would leave him 7% worse off because housing costs would eat up all his wage gains, and that only includes one slice of avocado toast per day. The cost of housing in high opportunity areas has skyrocketed so much that for many low-skill workers, moving to these places means taking a financial hit, not getting ahead. I want to emphasize this has completely changed migration patterns and our economy. Today, low-skill workers migrate away from high-income areas, while high-skill workers continue to move towards them. We're seeing a kind of class sorting that didn't exist before, and most concerning of all, the bottom rungs of the economic ladder are increasingly stuck where they are. Meanwhile, younger generations are doing something interesting. Gen Z is bucking the trend, often moving to large cities that older generations are leaving. Places like New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Philadelphia all saw net migration increases for Gen Z, despite net decreases for all other, some would call boring, generations. These young adults are choosing opportunity and dynamism over immediate affordability, while older generations prefer warmer climates and lower costs of living. But the barriers aren't just economic. They're psychological too. Moving isn't just financially costly, it's emotionally draining. The stress and anxiety surrounding a move can leave you sleep deprived, distracted, and unwilling to take the steps that would actually help you relocate. When I think about moving to New York, I immediately start to spiral. What if I run out of money? What if I can't find an apartment? What if I hate it there? The perceived obstacles loom much larger than they probably are in reality. There's also the pull of social and community ties. I'm not someone who moved around as a kid. I stayed in the same place pretty much my entire life. I moved one time when I went to college, and then I moved back. Those connections to family and friends create a powerful gravity that makes leaving difficult, even when you know better opportunities exist elsewhere. This trend is on the rise as reported rates of loneliness skyrocket across the country. If you have a couple of close friends, you're much less likely to want to lose them if everyone's having trouble finding new ones. But not pulling the trigger on moving has its own problems. The psychological impact of being stuck is huge. People who want to move and can't become more cynical and less satisfied with their lives. They grow more pessimistic, more inclined to see the world as zero-sum. They may feel less free to live their social lives as they see fit. Some argue these trends can explain some of our current political divides. Donald Trump's strongest support in 2016 came from people who stayed in and around their hometowns, while those who moved away were more likely to back Hillary Clinton. When people feel trapped, their politics can reflect that frustration. So how do we fix this? How do we get people moving again? This question has been weighing on me so much that I'm dedicating not just this video, but a trilogy to exploring it. Because the answer isn't simple. It involves policy, psychology, and a fundamental shift in how we think about politics and cities. In this series, we'll explore how scarcity has crept into different aspects of American life, starting with mobility, and then moving on to why many big things, housing, education, and healthcare, have gotten so prohibitively expensive in part 2. And then finally examining what a different future might look like in part 3. When I was at a book signing the other day, I got to listen to and meet Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, authors of a new book called Abundance. I highly recommend that you read it. Great guys, by the way. They're part of a growing movement, arguing that many of our biggest social problems, including our mobility crisis, stem from a problem of artificial scarcity. Let's take housing. We don't have a nationwide housing shortage. In many parts of the country, housing is relatively cheap and plentiful. The average home in Cleveland sells for $115,000, while in LA the number is over $1 million. What we have is a mismatch: housing scarcity in high opportunity areas and housing abundance in places with fewer jobs. This isn't an accident. It's the result of deliberate policy choices. A real solution has to start with abundance. But what does this mean? It's building more housing where people want to live. This means reforming zoning laws that restrict density, streamlining permitting processes, and getting rid of archaic town halls that don't represent the average voter. But policy is just one piece. I think there's also a personal dimension to this crisis that we can't ignore. Remember when I talked about the psychology of feeling stuck? There's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I wrote a whole Substack article about it you can find here, or here. I don't remember where the little card goes, but you'll see it. It's about how external factors shape our perception of what's possible. When things around you are going well, you're comfortable, you feel large, and in turn the outside world seems smaller and more manageable. But when things outside your control make you feel like you're struggling or anxious, you can start to feel small, and everything outside your control starts to look impossibly big. I've definitely experienced it myself. I think the longer I stay in one place, the more daunting the prospect of moving becomes. Tasks that objectively aren't that difficult, finding an apartment, packing boxes, going out and making new friends, start to feel genuinely insurmountable. And I think this happens to a lot of us. We get smaller as the challenges seem bigger. Challenges like getting a high-paying job, finding your purpose after college, figuring out the life you want to live and where you want to live it while you have the freedom to decide. Breaking this cycle requires a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on the barriers of moving, what if we glorified the potential upsides more? The new experiences, the career opportunities, the chance to improve yourself in ways you can't at home. What if we acknowledged more that yes, moving is hard, but it's a difficulty with a purpose? A challenge that historically has paid dividends for millions of people. I think about what Ezra Klein calls the lottery of birth. The fact that the economic prospects of children are dramatically shaped by the neighborhoods they grew up in. Moving to a high opportunity area can change not just your life, but the lives of your kids and grandkids. That's worth some temporary discomfort. On a practical level, this might mean breaking the moving process down into smaller, more manageable steps. Setting aside small amounts for a moving fund, researching neighborhoods and cities you're interested in. Even if a move isn't imminent, each small action reinforces the idea that mobility is possible. For me, I think making this video is part of that process. Articulating why I would want to move to New York, acknowledging the barriers but refusing to see them as permanent. The irony of the current mobility crisis is that it's happening alongside unprecedented technological change. We have apps that can summon a car in minutes, platforms that connect us to people around the world, and devices that put the sum of human knowledge in our pockets. Yet physically relocating ourselves from one place to another feels harder than ever. The solution to this paradox lies in embracing abundance, both as a policy framework and as a personal mindset. It means rejecting the idea that opportunity is a zero-sum game, that welcoming newcomers somehow diminishes what's available to current residents. History shows us the opposite is true. When more people can access opportunity, the whole pie grows. In the next video in the trilogy, we'll dive into explaining why everything seems to have gotten so expensive, and how the same mindset that limits mobility has shaped urban housing markets, educational institutions, and healthcare. Because understanding how we got here is crucial to charting a path forward for those who will make these decisions about their lives next. The American dream was built on the freedom to move, to go where opportunity calls. Reclaiming that freedom isn't easy, but it's essential if we want to remain a dynamic, innovative, and prosperous society. We should want to get unstuck. America's mobility crisis is both structural and psychological. The barriers to moving aren't just in our heads, but they're not just in the system either. They're interconnected. It's hard to overstate just how much is lost when people can no longer choose to move towards opportunity. The social science research suggests that the most important decision you can make about your children's future is not what you name them, or how you educate them, or even what extracurriculars you enroll them in. It's where you raise them. When we lose the ability to move freely, we lose the fundamental mechanism for creating opportunity and reducing inequality, things we desperately need these days. For more than 100 years, per capita income rose as people flowed from low income to high income areas. But we're no longer seeing this. In fact, the gap between rich and poor regions is growing for the first time since the Civil War. This threatens the fundamental promise of America, that no matter where you start, you can build a better life for yourself and your family. As for me in New York, I'm still figuring it out. The longer I stay in one place, the harder it is to leave. But making this video has helped me realize something. It isn't just about me wanting to live in a cool city. It's about giving myself opportunities to do something new, something better, something cool, even if I don't know what that is yet. Moving has never been easy. Those who crossed oceans or traversed continents to come here didn't do it because it was convenient. They did it because the opportunity on the other side was worth the struggle. What's changed isn't that moving is hard, it's that the questions are different. You won't necessarily make more money in a bigger city, so introspection is needed. You should ask yourself what you get from the move and make sure the decision is true to you and good for you. In the next video in the trilogy, we'll explore why everything seems to have gotten so expensive and how the same scarcity mindset that limits housing has shaped everything else. Because, and I cannot stress this enough, if we want to restore the American tradition of mobility, we need to understand exactly what's holding us back. I don't know if I'll end up in New York, but I do know that I want to live in a country where the choice is mine to make, not determined by artificial barriers or outdated regions, a country where opportunity isn't locked away in a handful of unaffordable cities. A country that remembers the freedom to move isn't just about personal choice. It's about keeping the American dream alive for everyone.